in terms of new cases and deaths.
Centers for Disease Control to recommend that Americans reconsider travel to Britain, the British Virgin Islands, Fiji, and Indonesia. The Johns Hopkins University coronavirus tally says infections were up again Monday to more than 58,000. 200 additional deaths in the country were blamed on the virus. A fifth and possibly a sixth Texas Democrat lawmaker who fled the state to avoid a vote on an election reform bill now testing positive for the virus. Vice President Harris, who met with some of them last week, tested negative at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the timing of Sunday's hospital visit was a coincidence.
It was a visit that was scheduled for several weeks, long before the visit of the Texas legislators, a routine appointment, which she had again scheduled several weeks ago.
It's 8 months in prison for Paul Hodgkins. He's the Florida man who has been waving a Trump 2020 flag on the Senate floor during the January 6th riot at the Capitol. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has selected 5 Republican members to sit on the House Select Committee probing the riot, including Indiana's Jim Banks and Ohio's Jim Jordan. They've found voter fraud in Wisconsin. A man who cast 2 absentee ballots now charged with 4 felonies. Prosecutors declining to pursue 18 other cases. America is listening to Fox News.
Mescla, read all about it. Check out Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tucumán for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet, the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon, Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, a true taste of Guam.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Presidential Commission studying possible changes to the U.S. Supreme Court meets again today.
This commission, which has met twice already, has 36 members and is co-chaired by 2 attorneys who served under the Obama administration. Today's meeting will hear from several legal experts and scholars on topics like composition of the court, term limits, turnover, and the confirmation process. At the last meeting in June, there was discussion surrounding court packing, with one notable scholar, Noah Feldman, saying court expansion should be a break glass measure reserved for a continuing judicial crisis, which he says we're not experiencing. One panelist recommended removing the ability of justices to strike down laws as unconstitutional, and another panelist recommended staggered 18-year term limits. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Chicago's police department has announced a new strike team made up of police officers, prosecutors, and federal agents to target gun trafficking. The city has allocated $1 million to offer cash rewards for tips that help get guns off the streets. Jury selection has begun in Columbia, South Carolina, in the trial of Nathaniel Rowland. He's accused of killing 21-year-old Samantha Josephson 2 years ago after she mistook his car for her rideshare. Police say they found her blood and her cell phone in Rowland's car. A California theme park reopening with changes made for cultural sensitivity.
Disneyland introduces its revamped Jungle Cruise attraction without racially insensitive depictions. The ride originally opening in 1955, featuring spear-waving head-hunting tribesmen. It now reportedly focuses on nature with scenes of wildlife chasing clueless tourists. Reps for Disney's Imagineering arm tell the Los Angeles Times the goal is to make sure that everyone who comes to the parks is seen and that they are heard. Disney also revamping the ride at Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom in Orlando. Kristen Goodwin, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Pastrami is back at Subway. Pepper-crusted beef layered with crispy pickles, mustard, and melted provolone cheese. Nothing comes close to the pleasure of sinking your teeth into that chewy, juicy, well-seasoned pastrami. It's happiness in a sub. Head down to the nearest Subway restaurant and satisfy your craving for the deli perfection that is pastrami. Subway. Eat fresh. Pastrami sub is available to all Subway locations on Guam and Saipan, including NCS, for a limited time only.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
A 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do.
We're happy to celebrate 77 years. Thank you, Uncle Sam, you're the reason we're here. Happy Liberation Day, Guam. Bank Pacific's here for you.
Viva Liberation!
Viva!
Viva Bank Pacific!
Viva!
Viva Guahan!
Viva!
Member FDIC.
Is that back home again in Indiana? You know what this reminds me of, Jose?
What is that?
Some of the exotic places that I've visited in my life.
Indiana's pretty exotic.
Well, I've been to Indonesia. I've been to India. And you know what? I've even been to Indiana. Yeah, pretty exotic. All right, so here we go on the second half of Tall Tales. And I'm picking up on an article that I didn't start yesterday because I didn't want to bifurcate it. It's Macris versus the doctors. And this one ran on Candid News. Longtime Guam doctor, Bill 112, with some changes, will improve medical care and save lives. Now, for a doctor to say that is a violation of the rule of omerta that, according to Macris, is imposed on all doctors by the health care providers mafia. He said that in an earlier article. So here's how it goes. This is from Candid News. The following is the complete testimony Dr. Macris provided to the legislature on Bill 112. And it goes like this. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to submit a long version testimony in favor of Bill 112-36 with modifications to the proposed law suggested at the end, as I anticipate being professionally undermined for this submission. I apologize for having to provide an abbreviated historical preamble and disclaimers for those who do not know who I am, as well as to illustrate what could happen to healthcare providers, which he calls HCPs. That includes MDs, DOs, nurses, etc. A DO is a doctor of what is it? Not optometry, not obstetrics.
I should know. My brother-in-law's one. Osteopath.
Osteopathy, yeah. Doctor of osteopathy. Osteopathy.
Osteopathy.
I had my emphasis on the wrong syllable there for a second. That speak up against the medical status quo. So once again, he says, I apologize for having to provide an abbreviated historical preamble and disclaimers for those who do not know who I am, as well as to illustrate what could happen to healthcare providers, HCPs, that speak up against the medical status quo. I've listened to hours of painful, often self-aggrandizing diatribes about how important and what legends these newly trained and politically connected doctors were, how much they sacrificed to come back to work on Guam at impossible starting salaries, and how they could live anywhere else. I kind of made the same comments myself. And how they were allegedly the only doctor who was able to care for or refer a patient off island. The mob was well orchestrated, using similar talking points, had the baby props, the borderline watermarks, and metaphorically winced in pain regarding the need to pay back loans which, unlike many Americans, approximate some doctors' gross annual GovGuam salaries. The reality is the primary reason individuals pursue careers in medicine and dentistry is for the money and for the prestige, and Guam is no different. The reality is the primary reason individuals pursue careers in medicine and dentistry is for money and prestige, and Guam is no different. He says that's the primary reason. Wanting to help people is somewhere on the list, keeping in mind that 2% to 4% of physicians are sociopaths. Whoa. Common denominators between doctors and sociopaths are traits such as superficial charm, an exaggerated sense of self-worth, glibness, lying, lack of remorse, and manipulation of others. Most doctors think they know better about how other people's lives should be lived or ended. I am not in any way suggesting that any of those who provided testimony are sociopaths, but I would like to point to Guam as a provider profile at the minimum, like the rest of the U.S. with the MMAA, maybe encouraging good health care providers to come, but also uninsurable ones. For what it's worth, visiting subspecialists are often able to carry malpractice insurance allowing coverage on Guam and are usually paid well for their services. And through all this, there was not a mention of unnecessary losses such as in the case of Asher Lebowski. Not a single doctor mentioned anything like that. I arrived in Guam in 1985 with the U.S. Navy as a submarine medical officer. I spent most of my time in Florida having current primary and subspecialty certifications by the American Board of Medical Specialties. I was a Guam Memorial Hospital medical director, Guam Board of Medical Examiner vice chair on a committee of the Federation of State Medical Boards, a reservist, drilled at NRMC Naval Regional Medical Centers, what we used to call a Naval Hospital at the time, and the first to have a private multi-special medical mammography when there were none, including GMHA, and a hyperbaric oxygen facility on Guam. He had his own hyperbaric facility. I was medical director of the Hyperbaric Treatment Center of the John Burns School of Medicine in Hawaii until 2016, where I periodically work and remain on clinical faculty. I was first licensed on Guam and in the CMNI in the 1980s and practiced in the Marianas until 2019. As such, I have a great deal of regional familiarity with medical care, and for what it's worth, have maintained a residence in Tamuning for over 36 years. As with most providers, the decision to practice on Guam had nothing to do with the MMAA. This is an after-effect attempt to change history, not on his part, but on others' part. Guam was a paradise close to Asia where there were no state taxes, limited competition, minimum regulation, and great diving. HCPs police themselves, and professional licenses were considered sacrosanct. In the mid-1990s, as old-school doctors began to retire, there arrived a certain element, and the situation changed for the worse due to reasons beyond the scope of this testimony. I am not on Guam because of malpractice, fraud, or for patient care beneath the standards, but not my own. With respect to healthcare industry regulation on Guam, fear of retribution plays an important role in preventing corrective action, especially when ADLOOP gets involved. As GMHA Medical Director, then Administrator Bill McMillan and I were proactive with respect to removing dangerous practitioners while attempting to enforce Public Law 24-84 relative to peer review, which was introduced by then Senator Lulian Guerrero. I formally expressed my concern about the fraudulent representations of training and certifications of two physician politicians, one in office at the time.
Well, that's a tough one to figure out.
Well, it wasn't Dr. Cruz.
Oh.
No, it wasn't. It was before it wasn't this Dr. Cruz. It was before him.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And stopping for the moment, Bill McMillan came in as the manager of GM at GMH, and he decided that there were too many employees there, and he set about to cut down the payroll of GMH and incurred great displeasure from various sectors of the community. I don't remember exactly how it all played out, but I do remember this, that Bill McMillan left the island with criminal charges pending against him. You know, when you break somebody's rice bowl, hardball starts. So I firmly expressed my concern about the fraudulent representation of training and certifications of two physician politicians, one in office at the time, including the lack of malpractice reporting. The surgeons wanted their way as well and more money at one time, and as a department did not respond to calls from the emergency room in a boycott orchestrated by one of those politician surgeons, which endangered patients to get what they wanted. As retribution, in 2006, the GMHA administrator suspended my privileges after the Board of Trustees chairman was removed. This action was later voided and vacated. In 2008, as president of the Guam Medical Society, signed the unanimous letter of no confidence in the GBME chair, and the very next day was invited to a disciplinary hearing. My license was suspended for allegedly violating patient confidentiality and negligence as determined by the board. There were no GBME patient complaints, no HIPAA violations, and no documented deviations from standard of care. The former GBMA attorney filed a case on my behalf 18 months before, when there was a different board for which he had to request from the judge permission to redact personally identifiable information. After replacing the chairman with a business partner of the lieutenant governor, the newly appointed, mostly GovGuam employee, GBME, having no provable violation, simply created one, and a private law firm was hired to prosecute me, and the hearing records, embarrassing to GovGuam, soon thereafter went missing. It's quite a story, isn't it? I was treated like an imminent threat to health and public safety for a court filing, and possibly the first Guam physician ever reported by GMHA to the National Practitioner Databank. My clinic had to abruptly cease treating medical cases with hyperbaric oxygen, without which patients died. The Navy, however, continued to treat diving accidents. Most healthcare providers in Guam are good and abhor unexpected patient mortality and morbidity, but some could care less. As previously mentioned by others, in the U.S., 1% of physicians were responsible for 32% of paid malpractice claims, with GMHA likely being the biggest local offender. On Guam, the HCP mafia, healthcare providers mafia of sorts, enforces omerta by punishing HCP's staff who attempt to expose even serially injurious providers' unsafe practices and policies. What was not disclosed in testimony is threatened or settled malpractice cases and selected unexpected adverse therapeutic outcomes, which is another way of saying deaths. Unexpected adverse therapeutic outcomes may never be referred for peer review depending on the provider. These cases are rarely, if ever, reported to the National Practitioner Databank. Even unlicensed practitioners have been allowed to practice on patients and the matter buried. Healthcare provider caucuses can make decisions based upon politics and money without following rules of evidence. Out of control HCP boards, administrators, committees can conduct sham peer reviews and invent violations which threaten the privileges and licenses of whistleblowers, and do so with qualified immunity and without oversight. Qualified immunity, I don't know. Well, let me take a minute here. Let's get out the Law and Order notebooks. This is what qualified immunity means, and it's come up an awful lot in the news lately in the context of police reform after the death of George Floyd. And here's how it works. Let's talk about policemen. Let's say that a citizen sues a police officer for some form of misconduct, battery, brutality, whatever. The police officer could plead an affirmative defense called qualified immunity. What that means is, if the offense had not been clearly established in case law at the time it was committed, then you wouldn't expect the officer to know about it. And since he didn't know about it, he had qualified immunity, which for police officers is very important, because the motion to dismiss based on qualified immunity happens very early in the case, before discovery, before the really burdensome parts of the case. So it's really important to doctors. Now, I suppose qualified immunity would also lie in the case of any public official on a medical board who was sued for violating the civil rights of someone who came before that board. I don't know that that's a, well, of course, Macris is saying it couldn't possibly happen here. Macris goes on to say retribution can involve the co-opting and political manipulation of government agencies, private attorneys, and even the judiciary. Without consequences, patients pay the price when adverse events are not reported, kept from the public, and no corrective action taken. Public Law 24-84 intended to improve medical practice by shielding peer review findings done at local hospitals, and mandatory arbitration meant to attract and retain insurable HCPs has failed, if not backfired. Moreover, Public Law 24-84 required the reporting to the National Practitioner Bank of certain adverse actions, including relating to malpractice settlements, in addition to that required by federal law, has not been complied with, and the National Practitioner Data Board rarely enforces its regulations. Testimony suggests Guam HCPs are more concerned about insurance companies will find out about malpractice settlements via the NPDB than patient care, when any settlement should be a matter of an official public record. HCP regulatory agency members need to be very, very carefully vetted. Peer review committee and licensing board adverse action should be unenforceable until there's an evidentiary hearing. Macris had first personal experience here. Healthcare facility whistleblower, HCPs, staff, employees, etc., should be placed on paid leave or allowed practice until a determination is made. Testimony suggests HCPs are in panic with the thought of having to deal with the consequences of not practicing within local, or as they allege, national standards. Bill 112 does not apply to Guam Memorial or Department of Public Health and Social Services, but cases with unexpected therapeutic adverse action can be sent to CMS, approved medical specialty professional review organizations, for an objective analysis. As mentioned, serially injurious providers continue to be allowed to practice if they are politically connected with a dysfunctional peer group process, perhaps 2 or 3 sets of negative findings from 3 separate medical specialty PROs evaluating unexpected deaths within a 3-year period should be grounds for statutory non-renewal or due process contract termination. The same objective assessment need to be applied to other regulatory agencies. HCPs on Guam are too incestuous and fearful of retribution should they act against another established provider or openly agree with Public Law 112. Look out, doctor, look out. You come forward and say, I think 112 is a good idea. You may get canceled. It's preposterous to require a Guam magistrate to be medically trained when in other jurisdictions, judges accept findings of fact with respect to medicine, engineering, environmental, and other issues. It may be appropriate to have the plaintiff, defendant, and magistrate each select a PRO and proceed with trial, arbitration, or dismissal depending on findings. In the U.S., 95% of cases are settled out of court, which doesn't surprise me. As the Chief Justice has recently hinted, it would take 1 year for a magistrate to be trained. It might be prudent to have the effective day of such law be 1 year after any passing. This would give HCPs concerned about cases a chance to leave the island before being sued, subject to any new law. So, it would take a year to train a magistrate. So, senators, you need to give us a 1-year getaway. I mean, yeah. Some jurisdictions have doctor-patient arbitration agreements which need to be codified in law to be legally enforceable. Patients and doctors can, by mutual consent, be bound to an arbitration process prior to elective care. Doctors can refuse to treat patients who do not agree to arbitration beforehand. Seems right. The MMAA should apply to all emergency on-call cases in all specialties, as well as elective obstetrics, with the exception of birth tourism. Explanation, what does birth tourism mean? We found out that pregnant women from Korea come down here, say a month before they're due, stay in a motel, have a child at the hospital here, wait a little while, and then go back to Korea. The child carrying with them a birth certificate from an American jurisdiction and a U.S. passport. So for some folks, it's worth it so that their children will be American citizens by birth.
Anchor babies.
Yeah, that's the term that's used, but it really doesn't work very well because a person has to be 21 years old before he is able, there are any derivative benefits from his American citizenship.
That's a long-term plan.
Yeah, it is. And the way it's sometimes sold is, well, yeah, they come down here and have their babies, and then next year they're bringing their whole family down. No, it doesn't work that way.
Or a quick growth spurt then.
Yeah. Okay, let's head for Wrigley Field for a few minutes, and we'll come back to George Macris.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Okay, so going on here, the ability to file a malpractice claim should be extended to 7 years, as is the practice in other states in the case of fraud. Patients or survivors should have recourse within the minimum 7-year period. Medical records are required to be accessible. Now, he takes another shot at the doctors. Acting with hubris, healthcare providers are threatening to abandon patients, leave island, and claim they will give up lucrative positions they would have a difficult time getting elsewhere, or refuse care for patients, quote, outside the scope of their practice. There is nothing which would prevent a provider from performing any intervention or doing any procedure to save a life or limb within reason, and many get malpractice coverage for the same on an elective basis. If they leave, it will likely be due to other reasons. Well, that certainly lets the air out of some of the testimony and some of the things we've heard, like Tom Shea, oh, I'm out of here. If this bill passes, I'm out of here. Most unexpected adverse therapeutic outcomes and deaths on Guam are related to problems with medical and nursing negligence, not watching monitors, providers not responding to calls, etc., and have nothing to do with the need for specialists or lack of equipment. Public law, Public Law 12-30, Bill 12-36, 112-36 will encourage healthcare providers to police colleagues, if not for self-preservation, but to keep medical malpractice premiums down. When industries or professions ineffectively regulate themselves in a manner which creates hazards to health and public safety, lawyers need to get involved. Who are you going to call? Call a lawyer. However, any proposed medical malpractice reform should include a statute of limitations for fraud, reasonable caps, and elimination of the small claims court provision. So that's it took a long time, but he had a lot to say, and it's the kind of comment that you're not going to get anywhere else. You're not going to get that from the average doctor. I listen a lot in the community. People sometimes tell me things on a non-attributable basis, and I understand that there are some doctors who think that Bill 112 would serve a salutary purpose, or that it could be modified a little bit and have a good purpose. But, well, how many times have we heard this? Yeah, I knew that's the way it was, but I didn't want to say anything, So it's hard to find people that have something to say that's on point, that are willing to take the heat that comes from speaking frankly. I didn't like it, but, I didn't want to say anything because,
That's the soft, what's that term you used? Mafia? The soft application of that mafia.
Yeah, omerta.
Omerta.
Omerta, yeah. Yeah, when you become a made man, you're told that if you break the rule of omerta, there's only one penalty. No one is ever punished for it twice. Okay, now we're going to Michael Bavacqua versus Liberation Day. Michael Bavacqua and Laura Souter see the 4th of July and Liberation Day as great opportunities to advance their separatist agenda. And it has the way they approach it has all the earmarks of critical race theory. And describing critical race theory goes like this. Everything must be viewed through the window of race. Race is the most important thing. And for Bavacqua and Souter, well, it's the way the American government treated Chamorros. The oppressor, the American government, Chamorros are the oppressed. So what you do then is you start out with that proposition, and then you go back and find historical events like Hannah, what's her name, Jones, the one who wrote the 1619 Project, says the first African slaves were brought to North America in 1619, and that's when the United States really began. Forget about 1776. Well, she's wrong on every single point, including that's when the first slaves were brought. But she starts out with that, and she says, and it's all about race, the oppressors and the oppressed. The oppressors are the white folks. The oppressed are what the left refers to as BIPOCs, black indigenous people of color. And Bavakwa does the same thing. He column after column talks in terms of the way the colonizers were unkind to the colonized. And, of course, the standard line for Liberation Day is there really wasn't any Liberation Day because we're not free yet. So here's his latest offering. Post-Liberation Race Riot censored by Navy. Historian Bernard Nolte writes in a pamphlet on black service in the Marine Corps during World War II about there being 3 battles of Guam in the 1940s. The first was the Japanese invasion of the island in December of 1941. The second, the U.S. retaking of the island in July of 1944. The third took place later that year, Christmas night, 1944. But rather than a fight between Japan and the U.S., it was between white and black soldiers in what historians have termed the Aganya Race Riot. In a series of conflicts involving members of the Navy and Marine Corps between December 23 and 26, 1944, several lives were lost and more than 40 were put in prison. But if you look in the newspapers of that year, you won't find any mention of the event. The Navy censored what took place for 6 months, and the truth came out after the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People challenged the trials that stemmed from the riot as severely punishing black troops while scarcely punishing white troops. In previous columns, I've talked about the racial discrimination non-white troops met while serving in the U.S. military. Therefore, right? And I'm going to stop here and add something, and that is the Marine Corps. I hate to say it about my beloved Marine Corps, but African Americans were not enlisted in the Marine Corps until World War II. Yeah. And in World War II, manpower was really critical. And so that policy was changed. The Marine Corps began not only enlisting, but drafting African Americans. The Marine Corps drafted even in the Korean War, a little known fact. But when black enlistees or draftees were brought in, they weren't sent to boot camp in San Diego or Parris Island. They were sent to a place called Montford Point on Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. They segregated the boot camps. And we all know that Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1948. But it was a segregated Marine Corps during World War II. That doesn't mean that everybody who ever served in the Marine Corps is a bad person, contrary to critical race theory. Bavakwa goes on to say, in previous columns, I've talked about racial discrimination non-white troops met while serving in the U.S. military. Despite their willingness to pay the ultimate sacrifice through military service, they faced terrible treatment from the military and white servicemen. Now, I always get a kick out of how he throws these things out as indisputable facts, no documentation, obviously no personal experience, just a narrative. For months after the U.S. had retaken Japan from the Japanese, black troops on island had reported harassment by white troops. Black soldiers were given liberty to come to Aganya for recreation, were harassed or attacked by white soldiers. Most of the incidents centered around the white soldiers wanting local women to themselves. Well?
Oh, my God. I'm just...
Yeah, this is Michael Bavakwa. Therefore, Guam should become independent.
He's a mind reader.
Yeah. Blacks were segregated into camps away from white soldiers. Sometimes white Marines would drive by black camps to yell racial insults and throw rocks at them. On more than one occasion, they threw smoke grenades into the camp. Once while very very flammable octane gas was being handled. Black soldiers reported these problems, but commanding officers, all of whom were white, refused to do anything about them. On December 23, the issue became more than incidents. First, a white soldier shot a black Marine to death in a quarrel over a Chamorro woman. Then a black sentry killed a white Marine who was harassing him. On Christmas Day, a black serviceman was shot and killed by a drunken white sailor, drunken white soldier. Early in the morning on December 26th, a group of white Marines began shooting at one of the black camps. The guards returned fire, injuring some of the Marines, forcing them to retreat. Blacks grabbed whatever weapons they could and followed the white Marines back to Agana, where they were arrested for unlawful assembly, stealing military property, and attempted murder. In the aftermath, more than 40 Marines were convicted, the majority of them black, with white servicemen either receiving no punishment or slaps on the wrist. Walter White, the executive secretary of the NAACP at the time, was on Guam and collected evidence and also acted as counsel to many of the black troops after years of lobbying and disseminating the story to national press. He and the NAACP were able to get the black convictions overturned. So this story has been in I read it in Wikipedia maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And Scamby told me about it also. May he rest in peace. So there was a race riot. I don't know exactly what happened. I'm certainly not going to take Bavacqua's column as an accurate reporting of what happened. But there is something to it. I don't know exactly what. And of course, for Bavacqua, timing is everything. Because Liberation Day is traditionally a day that we remember things like this. 1,548 Marines were killed in the liberation of Guam. They were just, most of them were just kids, from the U.S. But the Liberation Day bashers will come out with it. Well, we're really not liberated yet. So, stuff like the Post ran in that editorial on the 4th of July. And the separatists come out of the woodwork to do what they can, kind of like stink bomb Barnes, trying to throw a stink bomb into the whole proceedings. And then we have Laura Sauter, who wrapped up her column, Reflections on Liberation Day. And the last sentence, or the punchline in her column, is this. Many of us can trace part of our parentage to those who stormed the beaches of our island to free us from occupation by foreign forces, or those who came shortly thereafter and stayed. We cannot dare deny that. Why would you want to?
She's having trouble with it, though.
Yeah, but it is kind of troublesome,
Conflicting.
Yeah, and then here's the last paragraph. But we dare not forget that the story of liberation is only half written. It begs for a just and fair conclusion, one that is truly emancipating. No, emancipating. You're not talking about political status. You're talking about emancipation from slavery. Nice talk. This unfinished business is now our business, lest we forget. So pay no attention to Liberation Day, the parade we're not having, how some of the old folks remember it. Yeah, I got it. Pay no attention to those things. The really important thing is to remember that Guam is still an unincorporated territory, and we haven't been emancipated. Okay, so I'm gonna head for Churchill Downs, and I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm going to have to revert back to doctors again when I get to Churchill Downs.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists. Get ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Assen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silky's Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
Okay, so before I go to the green room, I've got to set a record straight here from a poster calling themself My Cool Res. He says, U.S. citizenship. Are you saying that can't come to U.S. until the child is an adult? I didn't say anything close to that. I said there would be no derivative benefits until the child was 21. Big difference. And then Michael says, yes, can come to the U.S. Parent are not U.S. citizens, but are allowed to come to the U.S. not to stay, though. Well, maybe they can, maybe they can't. The fact that they have a United States citizen baby really doesn't weigh into it, because they would still, depending on where they're from, probably still have to have visas in order to come to the United States. The baby wouldn't, because the baby's a United States citizen. And then, I guess with a bit of humor here, does that child qualify for the stimulus? I think if you asked Joe Biden, he'd say yes. And then Maria Espinosa chimes in, I was a teenager during the 60s. Why doesn't he write about the fights indicated by Chamorro boys against their own in another village? Well, that doesn't fit into the narrative, Maria. That wouldn't underlie his quest to separate Guam from the United States.
Or the great fights between the Chamorros and the Filipino immigrants.
Yeah.
And now the Carolinian immigrants.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of these kind of things happening because of differences.
And we've had Chamorros against sailors, and yeah.
But not systemic.
Yeah, it's not systemic, and if it doesn't fit into the narrative, there's no sense writing about it. Okay, so I said Churchill Downs, I would expect to go back to the doctors. It's not a medical doctor, it's Dr. McNinch. So Dr. McNinch, yeah, what can you tell me about these topics, Ron?
Hey, Happy Day, Senator, Happy Day, Guam. I would encourage everyone to go on Wikipedia and check Navy cross citations and just search for the word Guam or the Marianas. It's just incredible the numbers of detailed citations of valor there are on that website. Same thing, we had 4 Medal of Honor winners here on Guam. There's a 5th, an Army Air Force guy for an act of heroism between here and Japan. He was also awarded a Medal of Honor here. Guam is a field of honor. We have probably over several thousand Bronze Stars that were earned here, hundreds, I think several hundred Silver Stars were earned here, and scores of Navy Crosses were earned here. Absolutely incredible. History can be revisited and reinterpreted by anyone, but I think those facts speak for themselves.
That's a good point, Ron. You know, one of those Medal of Honor winners was General Lewis Wilson, who came out here for Liberation Day one year. I can't remember what year it was.
Right. Marine Corps Commandant, his Medal of Honor citation is amazing. He was a captain at the time, and Fonte Point, that whole area over a series of days, just an amazing and incredible story.
You know, if you go up to the top of Nemes Hill and then look down and imagine people trying to climb up what is close to a sheer cliff, you know, carrying their packs and their rifles, etc., you know, on a nice clear day, that would be quite an undertaking. But imagine what it must have been like when people were shooting at them. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, back to Lewis Wilson, a small world story. When he was here, when he was commandant, Scamby was his director of law enforcement. So Scamby had a close relationship with General Wilson, who came and visited us at the police department. So I had the honor of shaking and howdying with General Wilson, something that, of course, I haven't forgotten.
Wow, very nice. Hey, sir, have a great day and happy liberation, everyone. And let's remember the real meaning of liberation.
Good point, Ron. Thank you very much.
And it's never free. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, and happy liberation. You know, it's kind of like Happy Memorial Day. It just doesn't quite work right when you consider what liberation was all about. You know, certainly it was happy for the people of Guam that put up with almost 3 years of Japanese occupation. One of whom I know very, very well. I'll be seeing her right after the show. My wife went through it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about your first wife.
Well, she is my first wife.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Just clarifying.
But you know, I loved her so much I married her twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was tough. And the people, I when I came here in 1963, there were, you know, less than 20 years later, there were still plenty of people who would tell you stories about the Japanese occupation and liberation. And I don't have to make it up like Bavacqua did, you know, how grateful they were and how wonderful they felt. Folks like Tun Pete Sebojas. Tun Pete Sebojas was the commissioner of Barrigada. This is before we had mayors. And Tun Pete is the one that wrote and sang Uncle Sam, Please Come Back to Guam, which he would do at the drop of a hat, given an audience of any more than 2 people. You just, you know, this Souder Bavacqua approach to liberation is most prominent among people who don't know much about it. Okay, I got just a couple seconds here to get to let Mark Cruz make his mark before Liberation Day. Go, Mark.
Hey, Colonel. Hello, Your Honor. Sorry, you had me thinking of Scammy. Well, I talked to my dad, and it really didn't start out as a race war. It basically the black Marines were out of bounds during martial law, and that caused the whole thing to boil over. They just so happened to pass in front of the Provost Marshal's office, where Mescla is now, and were ordered back. And then the whites and the blacks started fighting, and the Provost Marshal started shooting people. So I'll talk to you on Thursday, and we'll get a better idea, because my dad was there. They lived around the corner.
Call in at the beginning of the show if you can, Mark. I'd really like to hear the rest of the story.
Okay, call you on Thursday at 4.
Okay, well, Semper Fidelis out there, all you SMC guys. We'll be back on Thursday.
Happy liberation, sir.
Thank you.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Spreading COVID-19 variants, the CDC said in a raised warning against travel to